Hello and welcome. I'm Jonathan Beale and this is the ASB Investment Podcast, a show that keeps you up to date on the market and helps you make smart choices with your investments. Today I'm chatting to Mairead, Needham and John Smith from ASB about an exciting development, ASB's new Positive Impact Fund, a groundbreaking fund with a preference for investments that make a positive impact on society or the environment. We'll talk about why we created the fund and share some of the positive stories coming from some of the companies, and of course, we'll let you know how you can invest in it. Let's start with the boring legal bit. ASB Group Investments Limited is the issuer of the ASB KiwiSaver scheme and ASB investment funds. For more information, see the ASB KiwiSaver scheme or ASB investment funds product disclosure statements available on ASB's website. These are entirely our own views. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that'll be happy to chat if you need. So welcome to the podcast booth, John and Mairead. Great to have you here today. Now, John, you've been here once before, I think. And I think, what were you talking about last time you were here?
Active and passive.
Active and passive, yeah. And how did you find the experience of sitting in the booth?
Well, it wasn't something I was looking forward to, given my nature, but yeah, no, I think it was actually a good experience. Yeah,
I thought you did really well, and the feedback we got was really good. So I think you did a great job. So Ray, this is the third time you've been in the podcast, and people will remember you from this little town outside of Dublin called...
outside Dublin.
Well, outside Dublin, sorry.
4 hours.
Called Mayo, and the fact that you love your job as well, which...
which I'm reminded of nearly weekly from someone around the office.
I don't know if I told you that I was down in Hawke's Bay meeting some customers, which was great, but I went into the branch in Havelock North. And I was talking to the personal banker there, and I was talking about the podcast, and I said, I did one with Mairead, and he goes, "Oh, Mairead, that sounds like an Irish name. Where's that?" And I said, "Oh, yes, she's from this small place outside of Dublin called Mayo." And he goes, "Oh, I've been there." I was like, "This is ridiculous. I've never heard of Mayo, and now all these people I'm meeting are from Mayo."
Was he a New Zealander?
No, he's not a New Zealander. Actually, I think he's moved from India to
New
Zealand, and he's got a distant relative who lives in Mayo.
Oh, wow.
You probably know them.
Oh, I probably do. Well, I'm surprised, when you started down this path that it wasn't, do you know such and such?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Because they're from Ireland,
exactly.
So we must know each other.
Now, just before we get talking about the ASB Positive Impact Fund, I think it might be helpful for the listeners to sort of understand a little bit about what John and Mairead do. So maybe, John, give us a very brief discussion about what does John Smith do at ASB and what's your role and responsibilities?
Yeah, so my job is, my title is Head of Asset Management. My responsibilities are, first and foremost, to produce some great investment outcomes, great investment returns for our customers. So I do, that's my focus on mostly on a day-to-day basis. But I think I have another responsibility, which is product development and product management, and so I can in both senses. This development of this fund is something that fits with my role, and I'm very passionate about.
Great, wonderful. And Mairead, you work with John, and tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're responsible for.
So I'm a senior investment analyst within the investment strategy team. My day-to-day role is these great investment outcomes that John talked about, ensuring that I'm analysing how did we come to these great investment outcomes? Did the decisions we made come off as we planned? But then another aspect to my role is investment manager selection, implementation and monitoring, which it'll become clear later when my input in this podcast as to how that plays out.
Great. Well, it sounds like I've got the perfect two people to talk about the new ASB Investment Impact Fund. So before we start maybe talking about the fund, let's go back in time a little bit, John, and maybe a couple of years, and start talking about what happened. I think it was in 2016, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2016, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to start talking what was happening then and how we've moved and what the journey's been like?
So back in 2016, I think the idea of responsible investing became a real topic and became to the forefront of New Zealanders' minds because there was a big media story about New Zealand fund managers investing in controversial weapons companies, so companies that were investing in cluster munitions, nuclear weapons, anti-personnel mines and things like that. And what it did is put in front of people's minds the fact that these sorts of investments were being made and, challenged them to say, well, actually, am I comfortable that the money that I'm giving to our investment managers, our fund managers, actually be investing this way. And the social media storm that came with that and all of the scrutiny that came from that, we took all that on board, and we learned a number of things from that. And while we had to go through a particular process in relation to those investments, I think the broader issue was that it's something that a lot of New Zealanders are very passionate about. And so we started a process from that point onwards, which was really understanding the concept of responsible investing, because at that point it was really about focused upon what you shouldn't be investing in. And that's one side of a story. But if you don't invest in a whole bunch of things, then it sort of like challenges the other side of the story, which is about getting great investment returns. And if you don't invest in a whole lot of stuff because you really don't like it, then actually is that going to limit your ability to get a great investment return? That's the sort of challenge. And then what is our true responsibility? Is it to get a great investment return? Is it our job actually to make choices for our customers and stop investing in things which some people may not agree with? And I think about a conversation we had with Mairead on this particular point, where I think you challenged us at some point about why should we make a decision not to invest in something? So maybe you give us your perspective on that, Mairead.
Yeah, so, we all make decisions in our own life, how we live it. So, like, I choose not to smoke, but, I do drink alcohol, and some things are more important to other people. So having you or an organisation dictate to me, like, things that are right or wrong, I felt kind of, I make decisions in my own life, and my investments, I trust that they're going to work for me and do, like, work hard for me. So I just struggled with that conversation in terms of, across the core funds, how far do you go? And it's hard to please everybody, and everybody has different passions and different views.
And I think you're right, John. You've got to come back to actually what's the fundamental role of an investment manager or a custodian of people's money is to actually give them the investment performance that they want. And to be able to do that, you need to be invested in a wide variety of investments.
Yeah, so you get this immediate challenge, which is that you want to get a great investment return. To do that, you want to have you want to basically have as wide an investment universe as possible. As soon as you start thinking about not investing in things, then you're narrowing that investment universe and you're narrowing your opportunities to get that great investment return. And then you think about that in terms of the way that Mairead's expressed it, which is, what's our role in deciding those things for our customers? So then you say, okay, what are our customers saying? And so we do survey our customers, and there are some relatively strong views, but they're not vast majorities. I mean, they're strong views, but so how do we actually reflect those views? And I suppose, and is it appropriate that we put our own views over the top of that? So that was one part of it. The other thing that came out of that exercise in 2016 was that customers were surprised at what they were investing in, and so this concept of transparency and knowing what they're invested in became really, really important. And so I think one of the things that we've developed since 2016 is this tool whereby people can actually use transparency, that we are transparent about what our customers are invested in. So that was one of the elements of the way that we approached it. We also look at in an overall responsible investing perspective, there is an element which is if you still invest in a company, you can still influence them, right? So one of the challenges about not investing in a company is that you no longer have any influence because you don't own the shares, you can't vote, you can't influence them in any way. So if you are invested in a company, then you have rights to vote, and you actually can influence the decisions of the company.
And I think that's
voting.
That's a really good point, John, because we've talked about it before around with Chris Tennant-Brown around the Facebook example recently, and an investor in that organisation, and lots of people invested in that organisation. But the weight of the fund managers getting together with the sort of started by the superannuation super fund, actually has a very, very loud voice and actually can get things changed and people to make some decisions. If you don't invest in that company, then you don't really have too much of a say, do you?
No, you don't. And what's more, it may actually be a great investment, and it may be that, some very, very large companies actually have some very small portions of what they do, which is something you don't agree with. And so do you cut your nose off to spite your face? Do you actually not invest in that company and all the good things that it might be doing for this little thing that it may not be? Is it maybe better to engage with the company and try and influence them in relation to that small portion? So that's an element of responsible investing as well.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. The transparency thing, I think, was probably the biggest learning from that experience. That people, what am I investing in, and giving people that sort of visibility. But also the other thing was around then options and choice, which I suppose is what's led us to developing this new product. And before we sort of bring Mairead into about actually the selection process and how we put that product together, John, you and I were lucky enough to go overseas 18 months or so ago to look globally at what people in the US and UK were doing around responsible investing. Do you want to sort of share with people a little bit of the learnings we got from that and which helped us with the product development?
Yeah, so I think that what we learned is that the standard approach, which is to not invest in companies, so exclusions, is fairly well established, but it's not sort of like the leading edge. The leading edge of responsible investing, so you go through a part of it which is companies are assessed on their environmental, social, and governance attributes, and they're scored, and then you can use those scores to weight your portfolios just to particular attributes. But at the forefront of this responsible investing regime is a thing called impact investing. And so impact investing is where you're actually picking a company that is actually a company that's looking to make a financial return. So it's not a charity or a trust that may be looking to make water clean in Africa, and they're actually not making a return out of that. That's just a social good project. But in actual fact, these companies might be are looking to make a financial return, so make a business out of doing things which are good from a social perspective or from an environmental perspective, such as, and maybe from a social perspective, it might be cheaper housing or something like that. And Mairead will talk a little bit more about some of the examples of impact investing, but this impacting investing is the real leading edge in terms of responsible investing. And when so that was a real learning, because that wasn't something that we'd been hearing about coming in the New Zealand environment. As it turns out, there is actually quite some activity in this market, but it wasn't an investment theme. So that was something that we learned from going overseas and getting this international research. And so when we came back and we thought about this dynamic which I've discussed, which is, should we be making choices for customers or should we give them choices to make? That was ultimately where this fund came from. It was we actually want to give people choices. If they don't agree with our view, which is about getting the best investment return, they actually are willing to place their desire to support social and environmental matters ahead of returns, or at least on par with returns, then we should create them a fund to do that. And so the concept of impact investing fits really, really well with that, because if you actually invest in companies that are making a positive environmental and social impact, then inherently you're not investing in companies that are doing bad stuff anyway. So you can get the best of both worlds. And so that was the genesis of this fund, which we think is very exciting, because it's actually positive. It's a really positive thing to be doing, rather than sort of a bit of a negative approach, which is just to starve companies of capital.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of a similarity. It's a bit like sort of positive feedback or positive reinforcement of, let's not stop focusing on the negatives. What are all the good things that you are doing? And that's pretty much what impact investing is about, is selecting companies that are trying to do something differently, trying to do it in a positive way, and I think this is the sort of misconception, still want to make a profit and still want to provide an investment return to the people who invest in that business.
Correct, yeah, absolutely. And so we came up with this fund's concept, and so then we gave a challenge to Mairead, who we said, okay, so this is the concept of this fund. So can you put together an investment strategy and to actually deliver on this? And so Mairead, maybe you can talk about how you worked on that.
Yep. So you gave me the concept and the views of the customer, what they were looking for, and also the objective of what the fund should aim to do. So deliver moderate to high returns and not invest in a range of things like tobacco, alcohol, gambling, adult entertainment, that kind of stuff. So once I had that key criteria, I could then go out and look at the market. What kind of funds can we invest in? So we engaged our consultant house, Mercer, who are based locally but have global offices and are highly regarded around the world, to help us with, well, what are our options? What funds are there available locally but also on an international scale that we could invest in? And also we have an in-house database with thousands of funds in there. So we had lots of resources and availability of looking at where we could invest. And from looking at that, it became quite clear that the New Zealand investor was quite forward-thinking in terms of what they wanted and their passions. And there was 2 funds available within the New Zealand market. One of them managed by Mercer themselves, and another one managed by Vanguard, who also have a presence in New Zealand and are highly regarded. In looking at those 2 funds, we decided to invest 60% with the Mercer fund, and that's in equity markets, so growth assets. And what I mean by that is stocks and shares of companies around the world. And then on the other side, the 40% goes into bonds, again, on a global scale. And whilst we would like to invest on a local basis and support New Zealand projects and Australasian projects, we found that the market is still pretty small here. It's developing, but we are in ongoing chats to local providers and local investment managers in terms of what they can do for us in the future.
It's also important to maybe mention about the why, the growth and the income split. So you still want to provide a sort of diversified portfolio. Do you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so our objective is to deliver moderate to high returns, and we want to give as much diversification as possible to the investor. So by giving them 60% to growth assets, the aim is to diversify across lots of different securities. In this case, there's about 800 securities around the world that we invest in. And then on the bond side, that 40%, there's about 1,500 securities within that portfolio. So overall, there's a lot of diversification across over 2,000 securities.
Another aspect to the selection of the 60-40 mix of growth and income assets is that across the suite of KiwiSaver and investment funds, that's equivalent to a balanced fund, and we wanted to create a fund that was going to be appropriate for a wide range of people. So while we find that there is a really attractive audience that's really attracted to this is the millennials, and they would typically be invested in a growth fund, there are still plenty of people who are more of my age, or more closer to retirement, that also have
not that close, not that close,
no. But that are also quite passionate about this. So we needed to find a fund that would suit a wide range of people. So we picked a balanced profile, and essentially that was the thing that drove the sort of like the allocation of 60% growth assets to 40% income assets.
I think it's important though, because you can, if you look globally, some of the funds actually are quite high concentration, smaller number of companies, which are going to be quite volatile and quite risky, and which isn't probably going to appeal to a wide selection of customers. So I think a balanced approach is probably a much more prudent way of doing it. Mm-hmm. I think maybe in the future we might find if it's there's a big appetite for these types of funds that you potentially could have different risk profiles for the different types of funds.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've used Mercer to help you select. We used our database. We've ended up with 2 sort of globally recognised names like Mercer and Vanguard. Mm-hmm. And so that's the fund. And so maybe I think the thing I love so much about this fund is maybe the stories or the types of companies that they're actually investing in. Do you want to maybe bring the fund to life a little bit and tell us a little bit about maybe some of the companies that the fund does invest in? Yeah,
so, well, as a base, every fund has to conform to specific ESG, so that's environmental, social and governance criteria. And then the investment managers take it a step further, and they actively go out and seek companies that have a majority of their business activities or their revenues from activities that generate a positive social impact or a positive environmental impact. And that's where it really got interesting for me in terms of the stories. So, for example, in Bangladesh, there's a company that we invest in that it's called Grameen Phone, which they support women in small rural communities in employment. So these women can go out and sell the services and the data of this company, and these people may not have any other employment opportunities. And the company seeks to have 99% coverage of the rural Bangladeshi service within mobile and internet. So it's really interesting, the stories there and how they generate revenue, and your money is still working really hard for you, and you're getting a return on your investment, and you can just benefit from actually that warm feeling of my money is actually doing something good for someone around the world. Yeah.
And it's interesting, I suppose, that when that company thinks about it, they're probably starting maybe differently. They're starting with how do I make the social impact? And that's first, and secondary is actually I'm still going to make some money out of this, which is sort of maybe a different approach that maybe a Facebook or a Google will make.
And they're like, to John's point earlier, they're not charities.
Yeah.
So they are, trying to generate a revenue and be a good investment for the investor, but also there is a nice little warm feeling that comes from, I'm doing a little bit of good. But I'm also, from a selfish point of view, my money's working hard, and I'm still going to reach my retirement goals. And then we'll say in India, there's a company called India Bulls Housing, and they focus on providing mortgages to low or middle income people, or maybe irregular income people who otherwise would be locked out of the housing market. So they open up a new life for people. So it's stuff like that you just go, well, these are amazing companies, and there's, the investment manager is making sure that they're good, solid investments, but they're existing to provide these amazing services and have a great outcome on the people that they work with. And that Indian company has 1 million customers.
Wow. Well, I think that's one of the most exciting things about this fund is that because I've got a bit of a view. Like you invest your money and for an end to achieve a goal, but actually understanding your investment, getting some more information about what you're investing in, sometimes is quite difficult. And so the stories associated with this fund, I just think, are going to be fantastic. And I think the way that we communicate those stories to customers, just like you have there, Mairead, I think will be really impactful. I think that's the advantage of this type of fund. Yes, you're still over the medium to long term going to get a good investment performance. That's what it's trying to do. But those two stories are just awesome, isn't it? It's very different.
And even, it doesn't just go to emerging markets. There's companies in America, for example, Nuance Communications, and they are an IT company who invests in healthcare. So their sole purpose is to improve technology within healthcare, primarily for home-based patients or physically challenged patients. And the results of that show that 90% of clinicians who use this technology have found it absolutely beneficial for both themselves, that frees up time for them to spend with patients, and also for the patients themselves, that they can maybe communicate better. Yeah, so there's hundreds of stories.
I could listen to you all day, Mairead, the stories about this. Well, it's just fantastic.
But even I didn't realise how passionate I was about this stuff until I started hearing and learning about these stories. And it was really only when I got into the detail that I was like, oh, this is really good stuff.
That's great.
And
that's great.
Yeah, I want to make money.
The thing I love about this as well is that we've had to start this fund because impact investing is still relatively new. We've had to start this fund investing into international funds, but there are stories like that in New Zealand and companies like that in New Zealand. And my passion is that we get people who are so passionate about this that the fund gets to a point where we actually can start looking into the New Zealand market and actually supporting some of those efforts. And we're already talking to the companies that are doing that here now. We just simply don't have the money yet, but with the support that we hope to get for this fund, I think that we'd like to be able to make those differences in New Zealand as well.
Absolutely, that's the plan going forward, that we can further diversify as well. So. Yeah.
And it's very consistent with the way we offer funds today, where they're ASB funds. We take responsibility for the investment performance. We're doing the asset allocation. We're doing the currency management with help from our advisors. But we're using underlying fund managers who know they're the specialists. They know exactly what they're doing. So it fits very beautifully into the way we do it. And this fund will then be accessed by ASB KiwiSaver or ASB investment funds.
Yeah.
So it'll be a choice that a customer can make to allocate their existing balance or some of their balance or some of their contributions either to this fund or any other ASB fund. So.
I mean, we've already seen any number of people within ASB who are quite passionate about this. What I've just been blown away by is, as we've developed this fund, the support we've got and the excitement we've got from just the staff around us. As Mairead has been talking about how actually she reacted to the work that she did on this stuff. And I think this really does resonate with people. And just in the first few days, we've seen quite a lot of people actually put a little bit of their money or all of their money into this because there is quite a lot of passion. And, it's almost like a cause people can support.
Yeah.
And they can do it in a way where the investment returns are still positive. It's still good investment returns. So yeah,
I think you made a point about millennials earlier, but that there is sort of a groundswell of millennials who this is a big focus for them. But I think actually your point was it's much broader than that, isn't it? It isn't just a millennial thing. It is actually, particularly in New Zealand, people care and are very passionate about this. And I think it doesn't matter how old you are.
No.
I think this fund will resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's got the social impact and it's got the environmental impact. So it does satisfy a lot of different causes and passions for people.
Mairead, some of those stories are just absolutely fantastic. And they are very focused on sort of the social impact that the fund's going to have. But as was mentioned earlier, this fund has maybe sort of two pillars, I suppose, or two legs to the stool around one's social and one's environmental. Have you got any sort of stats or feedback about actually what sort of environmental impact that this fund has or tries to have?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of fun facts in there about the carbon footprint, which is a popular buzzword at the moment. So the Mercer Equity Fund has a 42% lower carbon footprint relative to the wider market. And that is partly because we exclude fossil fuels, but there's also direct investments in there that are mindful of carbon footprint. And then the other fun fact is about green revenues. So revenues that come from environmentally positive impacts, and they are 50% higher than the benchmark as well. So they're quite big numbers.
And just playing sort of using my sort of stupid hat is so carbon footprint. What does that actually mean? So what we're having less impact on the environment through the companies they invest in. They're using less carbon. Is that what we're saying? That's
exactly it. Yeah. So in terms of we invest in fewer airlines, for example, who have a high carbon footprint.
Yeah. So Mairead, it obviously is having a big impact on the environment, so less carbon, which sounds great, and also that you've already talked about the social impacts of some of the companies, but also I think it's aligned with the UN. Do you want to explain that a little bit to the listeners?
Yeah, so a few years ago the UN came up with these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they've got they aim to achieve over the next number of years, and they are classified under 5 different themes, and those themes are basic needs and living essentials, so such as clean water and sanitation, human empowerment, climate change, natural capital and governance.
Okay, so it's obviously the UN have come up with these 17 and actually the fund aligns very closely to those. So the investment managers are mindful of these themes and invest in accordance with these themes. Okay, great. So this fund is not it's definitely a fund that is very focused on impact. And as John said, like sort of globally leading exclusions was sort of almost like a 20 years ago, people would exclude, and that's evolved into impact. And I think as this product develops and we move forward, I think we'll start to see more and more of these funds in the market, more and more sort of stories about more opportunities. And more opportunities as well, and particularly around Australia and New Zealand, which will be a goal of ours, definitely, if we can, particularly New Zealand, start to invest in companies in New Zealand who are focusing on impact. I think that would be an awesome experience for us and for our customers. So we might wrap it up there, guys. So just a big thank you from me. Thanks very much, John and Mairead, for coming in today. Apologies for the warmth of the recording booth. It's not normally this warm. So thanks again for that. I think you've really explained the history of how we've developed this product, the process we've gone through for the product, and the sort of the excitingness of the product, I suppose, and the type of companies that the fund's going to invest in and the impacts it's going to make. So really, thanks very much. Really appreciate the time and talking to you today. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Jonathan.
Now, if you want to find out more about the ASB Positive Impact Fund and how to invest, it's pretty simple. All you got to do is search Positive Impact Fund on asb.co.nz. Thanks for joining us today on the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on future shows, please fire your suggestions through to podcasts@asb.co.nz.